We are joined now by Joe Healy. He's a writer, podcaster, and self-proclaimed college baseball nerd for D1 Baseball. Joe, how are you this morning?
Doing pretty well. How about you, fellas?
Good, good. No ordinary Joe. Joe, let me ask you something. It's hard to not know what you do know, but if you don't know any history, you don't really know Schnall's personality and you're not really um, paying much attention to Campos in terms of his history. When you're looking at that situation on the surface, should or should not the personalities matter when you're trying to arrive at right and wrongs?
Oh, interesting question. We're getting into philosophy right away. How about that? Yeah, I think so. Yes, in this case, because if you want to give the most kind interpretation of what happened yesterday, you had an umpire who understood. I've got a head coach on one side who is an intense guy,
Mm-hmm.
and we're not going to let this thing get away from us. And if I'm hearing it from him like that in the first inning, that I need to get this under control.
Yeah.
So I can see that. But that's not me saying I agree with that thought process, but I'm saying I think I understand it from that standpoint. So I guess my answer is yes, but I hadn't really thought about it that way. So I'm not really sure, to be honest with you, but I can understand where Angel Campos kind of thought, hey, I need to get this under control. Now, I think he totally mishandled it, but I can
Yeah,
see
so
where
that
his thought process was.
okay, yeah, so that's interesting, right? Because I think having because I agree with it. I almost agree with all of that. But but I also think if I'm Campos, I'm like it didn't have to. You wanted the respect from one way, but you didn't treat your own position with the same amount of like reverence that people have for it. You know what I mean? It's almost
Yeah.
like, well, you
Yeah.
want your coach to act a certain way, but
He
me
was
as
mad
an
that he was getting
umpire,
disrespected by Schnall, but then was not giving Schnall any respect to try and de-escalate.
correct.
Yeah.
Is that
Yeah,
is
and this is a larger problem too in college baseball. Just generally, is that
that was
there's a
my
really
that's going to be my, that was my follow up because I'm glad you're already going there, but go ahead.
yeah, like this is a larger problem in college baseball where
It
there's just
is.
not a lot of respect and trust going back and forth between the two parties, and I think frankly, it needs to be something that we as college baseball community take a longer look at
Yeah.
moving forward because this was an extreme case in part because of the stage we were on, but this is not an isolated incident in college baseball in terms of this kind of thing happening where a guy gets ejected and we're all kind of like, what on earth just happened here? Um, and look, it's handled poorly in this case, and I hate whenever we see these quick triggers in big games. But then on the other hand, it's like these umpires are look. I'm just giving them a little bit of grace. They're trying to do the best they can, right? So like clearly there's a disconnect. Clearly something is wrong here with the way this is being handled. Like let's get to the bottom of this and let's figure out how to move forward because like we just cannot. Like think about if this happened. Like what if what if Jay Wright of Villanova had been ejected 4 minutes into a Final Four game, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
that would be the most absurd thing that's ever happened, and it would be one of the biggest scandals in college basketball history.
Yeah.
But in baseball, we thought, well, that's weird, but we don't really bat an eyelash at it because like we kind of have these things happen in college baseball.
I love the fact that you got into that aspect of it because I love baseball. And kind of the purist in me, I was having these meltdowns, full disclosure, Joe, of the last, what, month probably, ever since the Women's College World Series
Mm-hmm.
and the regionals, because it's not so much about gender equality in terms of what's allowed and what isn't. I won't get that political, but I said, what is it about softball where you can chant, you can fist bump, you can pirouette, you can have these intricate two down, one down, that's three outs, and we don't really bat an eye at it, right? It's just in part in the game. But like if you look at a guy too long in baseball, or frame something a second and a half too long, or like we're all of a sudden getting ejections. There were so many guys kicked out over the last handful of years in college baseball. I'm like, what is going on? It wasn't so much that I'm upset at softball. I'm thinking to myself, why can't we police ourselves better in baseball without the knee jerk you're booted reactions? And it was explained to me over the last month of me crying about it is we just don't trust our testosterone levels. Can we sit down at the table though, Joe, and your opinion and talk through what's allowed and what's over the top to get a semblance of uniformity?
I'd like to think so, right? I mean, and I think there's options here. I mean, one of them that I've talked about, and maybe this is overly simplistic, but like let's rewind back to the first inning yesterday, and look, Kevin Schnall didn't like the zone, and oh, by the way, like I've seen the umpire scorecard for Angel Campos, and it wasn't great.
No,
it was a bad zone. Like, to be fair, it was a bad zone.
Yeah, it was tough.
So like let's establish that. But like what if who cares if he's complaining about your strike zone? Like, it's one thing if he's like running out on the field and standing on home plate and making it to where we can't continue the game. Like, okay, maybe that's a little different. But him just chirping you from the dugout, like, why do we have to address that? Yeah. Like, let him be mad. Like, basketball coaches complain to referees about every foul
incessantly,
right? Like, and it's not, and ejections happen in basketball, but not that often,
and usually not for that either, right?
Yeah. Right, exactly, 100%. Yeah, it's usually something that escalates from there. So why can't we just have the same thing in baseball? Like, let him be mad. That's just part of the game. You're gonna miss calls. He's gonna think you missed calls that you actually got right. Like, all that stuff. I don't know why we necessarily need to get that under wraps. I've actually long understood why, there's this like invisible red line about you can't argue balls and strikes. Well, why not? Who cares? Like, it's not like you can go fix it, but anyway, that's just I think that's a simple fix. Like, I just don't understand why we don't have that same understanding the way we do in other sports, because it's not as if coaches in other sports are just saints about letting referees and umpires be wrong. Like, there's a lot of complaining, but in other sports, they don't have ejections the way they do in baseball. And I'm not sure why we have to be different that way.
Joe, you've brought up basketball a couple of times here. And as a former college basketball coach, like I very much appreciate the analogy because, I agree with DB that there's different sports that the culture kind of allows for different things. But I don't, like, if we were afraid of guys just fighting each other, then why do we, like in men's basketball, like I've seen coaches just wear refs out, right? And so have you, not just in basketball, but in football too. We had one here. His name was Bo Pelini. He got after it pretty good, right? We've seen Nick Saban do it. Like, we've seen you just wear guys out in football. And the
have you not seen Sarkisian?
Yeah, the ref doesn't even turn. Like, he doesn't even turn his head, right? We see it in basketball where there's jog right up and back down the court, and you hear, I mean, I've sat behind some of these benches, and you hear every colorful word under the sun, and the ref just keeps running back up and down the court. Like, is it too much to ask in baseball just to say, like, hey, you have to give the coach every opportunity to not be ejected until they clearly do something that is either so egregious and offensive that they have to be removed, or that it's actively interfering with the game. Like, I mean, shoot, Shaka Smart plays defense half the time. Like, he's on the court.
Schnall wouldn't have been coaching today. Like, that seems a little excessive.
Like, what? Like, is it just baseball umpires take themselves way too seriously? Because that's kind of where I'm landing, and I don't know if that's right.
Well, I think there's something to that culturally. I mean, I do think just the culture and the history of baseball has put umpires in a place where, let's face it, like the whole like give and take between an umpire and in the major leagues, we call them managers, between umpires and managers is like a thing, right? Like, we kind of laugh and applaud at Bobby Cox of the Braves because he got ejected the most times in history. And it's almost like that's a fun little quirk of the system, right? But the difference is in Major League Baseball, like, to your point, like, it's not happening in the World Series. It doesn't mean he's suspended for like the next game automatically. There's like a system of checks and balances, and the committee will look at it and decide what is deserved, all that kind of stuff. But I think we can kind of take a fresh look at this and say, like, look, there just needs to be some grace for coaches and what they say. Because here's the other thing is, like, you mentioned like the Bo Pelini example, and that's a great one where the football coach is literally standing 6 inches behind the referee and complaining in his ear, and the referee doesn't react. It's just he lets it go. In baseball, how far from the home plate to the dugout entrance is what, 150 feet? Something
Yeah.
like that. So there's a physical barrier there. So the umpire probably sometimes, especially here when there's 25,000 people in the stands, probably can't even hear him a lot of the time. And so I'm not sure unless he is stopping you from continuing to play the game. Like if he is a nuisance on the field, if he's doing the Shaka Smart and he's walking out there and standing between the mound and home plate, okay, let's deal with that when we get there. But otherwise, I'm not sure why the umpire needs to insert himself into that situation there if the game is not being stopped.
We're talking with Joe Healy from D1 Baseball. And Joe, I promise we will actually talk about some baseball now, not just the philosophy.
It's your fault for giving good answers, Joe. I'm just saying.
Not just the philosophy behind whether or not a guy should get run.
It is good for the growth of the game, though, because I am concerned.
It is. It's honestly, it's something that drives me crazy because as having coached in basketball, but I do really love baseball. It's hard for me to watch because I'm like, this isn't like I think the umps feel like they're too much part of the game a little bit, which is kind of why I asked the question the way I did. But I do want to get to the actual baseball of it all. And I asked DB this question earlier, and I'm curious what your answer is because we both think that college baseball's postseason is one of the most difficult to navigate and to end up being the champion. Do you think from the outset that LSU was the best team versus did they just play the best over the course of the last few weeks?
Yeah, I think it's more the latter. I think they just played the best. I thought I thought Arkansas was more talented. And there might have been another SEC roster. I'd have to take a fresh look at it that was more talented than LSU. But a couple of things I think were key for LSU is one is that it felt like this season in general was also one where there never at any point during the season was just a team that we thought of, hey, this is the odds-on favorite to win the national title. It felt very evenly matched across, let's say, the top 8 or 10 teams in the country. Like you could have just picked them out of a hat and understood, and picked a reasonable national champion. And I think that's part of the reason why we saw so much parity in terms of getting to Omaha, right? With the team Murray State and Arizona and Louisville and a lot of teams that weren't necessarily at the front of mind going into the postseason. The other thing is that LSU's coaching staff is masterful at its roster actually getting deeper as the season goes on. So it tends to go the opposite way. Like as the games get bigger, coaches tend to trust fewer and fewer players. Well, LSU is kind of the other way where they are using the regular season and even early in the postseason to evaluate who do we have on our roster that maybe hasn't helped us to this point that much that we think can help us if we get to Omaha. And so it's a situation where, they use Cooper Williams, a left-handed pitcher who didn't pitch really at all early in the season, and he's a guy they were ready to use in Omaha. Ethan Fry was a guy who was in and out of the lineup early in the season. Here in Omaha, he's in the lineup every day, and he's batting second. Michael Braswell, the 9-hitter, their third baseman, is hitting like 180 and was overmatched at the plate in Omaha. But he plays such good defense, they were willing to make that trade, and so he was platooning early in the season, and they said, nope, we're going to stick with him because we think his defense is that much of a difference maker. And sure enough, in game one of the finals, he makes 3 outstanding plays that, any one of those gets botched and the result is different. And so LSU's coaching staff just does such a good job of maximizing its roster at the right time of year. And I think that's a big part of why they ended up lifting the trophy yesterday.
Let me ask you something, Joe, just because, we're kind of going through this and clearly you want to be good situationally and you want to have timely hits and all the things that lend itself to the obvious in terms of winning baseball games. But when you're watching this LSU bunch almost to a man, since the interviews and cameras being shoved in front of their faces from the regionals to the supers till now, they talk about their camaraderie and their chemistry. Hey, this is just LSU baseball. And it doesn't really seem to matter who is coaching the baseball team. They say this is LSU baseball. So I ask, how much of this is Jay Johnson-esque versus, you know what? This is just kind of the culture that's been created, that's been able to withstand multiple skippers.
I think it's a boring answer, but I think it's both. I think Jay Johnson's done a great job of not trying to be something different at LSU. I think he understood that, hey, I'm going to go to LSU and I'm going to mold myself a little bit to LSU versus saying, hey, let's come in here and take a totally fresh approach to everything. And I think part of it, frankly, is, the kind of the patriarch of that program, Skip Bertman, who's 87 years old and was at the game yesterday. It was fun to see.
Yeah.
Like he's still around. Jay Johnson is still talks to him all the time. I think so. I do think there's kind of just a reverence for coaches who coach there for the program and what they've accomplished. Because the other thing about it is that this is not a situation where LSU baseball has been dominant since the 1940s. I mean, they really just figured it out in the 80s. With Skip Bertman. So it's not that long ago that they really kind of started getting going. So I think that's part of it too, is that, for the most part, these folks were alive when LSU baseball got going. They saw the depths they came from to be what they are now. So I think the answer is a little bit of both. I think Jay Johnson's a master of his craft, but on the other hand, I do think it's a little bit of just understanding, hey, I'm walking into a sports car here. I just need to not run it off the road in order to have success.
Joe, I do kind of wonder every year. This is I think I added it up. This was the 29th year I'd been to College World Series games. Obviously, growing up in Omaha, I started early. But I do always kind of reflect after each series, be like, how do I feel like that was overall as a series? And I'd ask you to kind of do the same here. As an overall series, obviously you didn't have any of the if necessary games as both teams got through clean on their bracket side. How did you feel about the series as a whole, just in terms of the quality of the championship?
In terms of the quality of games, I thought it was really good, really good to great. I mean, we had very few just total stinkers.
Yeah.
There was a lot of games that were close, and we had some games that came down to the final pitches, especially early. That first day was just nothing but that. And so I look at it from the quality of game as being really good. I also think I'm hopeful, I guess, as we move forward, that we'll look back at this as a series that reminded us that college baseball is different in that you can be a Murray State and get here. You can be a program that has struggled to get back here, like UCLA and Louisville, and get back. And after last year, when it was 4 SEC, 4 ACC, and I think myself included, we were all kind of worried about, is this just going to be what it is now? Is this just a two-conference and maybe the occasional interloper? Is this what we're going to be looking at? And there was all kinds of talk about that. It was nice to have this year where it reverted back to kind of what we typically see here in Omaha. And I think it was a reminder that, look, are there advantages in the SEC and ACC, and are we just going to have to get used to that? Yes. However, because of the way the postseason works, to your point, and just because of this being college baseball and, momentum is as good as your next day's starting pitcher, this is an event that I think we're going to look back, and last year's field is going to be the outlier, not this year's field. And I think that was nice. That was refreshing that we saw that and kind of were reminded of, no, this is actually how this typically works.
So I've been sorry, I'm bringing you into my own kind of thought process here. I've been thinking a lot about the way we view successful seasons for different types of sports teams. Obviously, you see the NBA Finals wraps up last night as well. And so I'm thinking about okay, how does Indiana feel this morning as opposed to OKC? And you brought up Murray State, which I've always felt like for certain teams, and LSU doesn't fall in this category for sure, but for certain teams, getting to Omaha is the point. I don't think they get here and think, not consciously thinking hey, we don't care about winning a national championship, but at the end of the day, Murray State making the College World Series, that's the goal. That's more, I don't know that, I think especially in college baseball, I don't know that people always talk about it in terms of, hey, we have to win a national championship unless you're kind of that upper echelon of team. I think a lot of teams, it's hey, if we make it to Omaha, that's the year, right? Am I crazy? Do you see that with certain teams you're kind of covering college baseball?
Oh, 100%. And I think you can apply some context too in a situation where I think in an honest moment, Dan McDonald, Louisville, and John Savage, UCLA, looked around and wondered, have I gone to Omaha for the last time with this program?
Yeah.
Because it kind of looked like those programs were kind of over.
It was 19, right, for Dan?
Yeah. Yes, exactly. And so longer for Savage. They hadn't been back since they won it in 2013. And so for those programs to get back, yes, would they have wanted to get further? Yes, but I do think in context, those teams just getting back here probably had what they would call really, really good seasons, great seasons that they feel like are building blocks. So I agree with you. And it's one of the things I like about college baseball is that we can hold two thoughts in our head. We can hold the thought in our head that, hey, for LSU and Arkansas in particular, those two teams are here to win the national title, and we saw it with the way Arkansas lost. Like, the fact that they didn't was a crushing blow.
I'd argue
But
Coastal
at the
too.
same time, yeah, that's fair. That's totally fair with the season they had and the run they were on and
Who they think they
all
are
of
as a
that.
baseball program.
Right, and I think that's fair. But we can also hold the thought in our head of, like, there's this other grab bag of teams that for whom, like, yes, I guess if they go on a run here, they're going to take it. But also, if the season ended right here, they're going to be satisfied with the way it played out. And I think that's one of the great things about college baseball.
This is interesting, Joe, because and I'm just going back through the Rolodex. I saw Calvin Schiraldi live, right, as a kid. I've seen Plutko. I've seen Beckwith. I've seen Fido. Like, when you talk about this Kumar Rocker, I was on that call for Westwood One. When you're watching what's happening with Cade Anderson, and in a crazy world, Woods' no-hitter is overshadowed. I don't know if it was because it was Murray State. I don't know if it's because Arkansas was at home. But when you're looking at what some of these arms were able to do on the bump, and in particular, going 130 in a shutout after the stellar performance against Arkansas, how long will it take the pitching performance for you to set in relative to what else was happening at the College World Series this year?
Yeah, it's a good question because I don't know that I've totally come to terms with the fact that we had arguably the most dominant pitching performance that's ever been seen at this stage with Gage Wood, and then
well, it's only been 50 years. I mean,
well, and not just that, but the 19 Ks, like, that's crazy.
Yeah, it's ludicrous.
Yeah, throwing a no-hitter with 19 Ks is
bonkers.
Impossible just because of the pitch count piece of it, So, yeah, and then having Cade Anderson arguably overshadow that with his performance, when you consider the importance of that performance and where they were, the stage of the series, all that kind of stuff, it overshadowed. Like, I don't know that I've totally had that sink in, especially when you consider, 2 years ago we all saw the Skeens Louder game, and I thought, well, this is the best.
That's I've missed that one.
So, like, and yet that's the best pitching matchup, mano a mano that I've seen here. But those two pitching performances we saw this year are probably better individual performances. And so, yeah, it'll probably be some point this offseason when I'm kind of going back stuff that it'll really hit home, like what I saw here from a pitching standpoint. But man, yeah, I mean, it was a return to pitching here at the College World Series. And, like, if that's going to be the case and we're going to have low scoring games, let's at least have really dominant pitching performances to help us enjoy it.
All right, I'll get you out on this show. I have to take advantage of your expertise because he's kind of one of our very own, and he was from right down the road. And I got to ask you about O'Connor and just the move to Mississippi State. We always talk about financial commitment, and Mississippi State, baseball is their one sport where it's just incredible how they're able to function. When you're taking a look at Fid, and we obviously have a personal connection to Brian, is that probably the best hire in the off season technically for college baseball, one that intrigues you the most, or am I just a little biased because it's Brian?
No, I think you're onto it. Like, I think it was of the off season, it was the most inspiring hire, and I think it was the best hire that Mississippi State could have hoped to make. Bringing in a coach who has won a national title, has been to Omaha a bunch of times, and recently, not like it's ancient history. Yeah. So I think it's about as good as they could have hoped to have done, and you have everything you need to succeed at Mississippi State. But the flip side of it is that it is a fishbowl. It is a pressure cooker in a way that Virginia is not. As much success as they had at Virginia, there's not the pressure that comes with it in the way that Mississippi State does, where, like, you got to win immediately and you got to win consistently to have success there. I think he will, but it's a different deal. But I do think it was the best hire that Mississippi State could have made. I think we've seen with the way the players, players from Virginia have followed him there. He's held a lot of players.
Yeah, that didn't take long, did it?
There. No. I mean, they're going to have, I don't know, we're way ahead of it here. We haven't looked at it yet, but would it shock me if we have them in the top 10, 15 to start next year? No, because, like, their roster is really talented. So at least initially, it looks like all parties should be extremely satisfied with how it's played out. But that was the hard part, because that is a place that gives you everything you need to win. But the flip side of it is you better win, and you better win soon.
All right, I fibbed. One more. I had a hot take after the settlement hearing went final, and I'm looking at some of these pie charts for some athletic directors that are sharing revenue splits. And my hot take was baseball was already fairly fluid. Rosters have been moving since before it was even popular. There was no transfer portal, there was no NIL. We used to stash and store guys in junior colleges, and we moved on, right? Is college baseball, in your opinion, the most difficult sport of the majors to coach with this new financial revenue sharing period?
I think there's a great argument for it. I hadn't thought about it that way, so I wish I could give you a better answer comparatively to other sports, but I kind of just agree with the take on its face, where when you consider things like the relatively small amount of coaches managing a 35 or 40 man roster in the fall, it is a relationship deal now in college sports, where you have to re-recruit your roster every single year.
Yeah.
And if you got 4 coaches, how on earth are you able to have a close enough relationship with all 35 or 40 of those guys?
And it was already buddy. I mean, this sport was very mobile long before it was cool to be mobile.
No doubt. So yeah, I buy that, especially when you consider too, it's going to be, anybody that tells you they know exactly how it's going to play out from a financial perspective is either full of it, or they know they should not be doing sports media for a living. But baseball strikes me as a sport where that's going to be really kind of a wild card, because there are places that really want to invest in baseball. There are places that see baseball as no different than, some of the smaller sports. And so how it shakes out financially is a big question mark, honestly. And so you add that to the movement, the player movement on top of it. I get that they're well paid, but I'm not sure I would want to be a college baseball coach these days. It seems like the absolute toughest job, and so I salute them for sticking around and sticking to it and continuing forward, because I don't know if I would have the same inclination.
That's our guy, Joe Healy, D1 Baseball. Joe, appreciate the time. Hope you enjoyed the College World Series, and we'll talk again soon.
All right, sounds good, fellas. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe.